Stand along with their posters. The judges will evaluate for half an hour and then they will be joining for the lunch. So we will finish this poster evaluation just after the lunch break or during the lunch break. So everyone I request to be there along with their posters so that they can explain their posters to the judges.
In this session, we do have experts on the subject area, and then very interestingly, we have economists who is going to be the newspaper presenter, and they have lots of expertise behind, besides being an economist in such area. And the scope still exists for AMR, and maybe not only AMR, we discussed earlier also for the treatment of chronic diseases like tuberculosis, brucellosis. So we have to go to some alternative ways and means where we have to find approaches that are equivalent to, or maybe in an integrated way, are somehow providing some help than making use of only antibiotics. So we have seen some of the leads that have emerged where immunotherapy is one such potential approach, and there are many possibilities for immunotherapies. Therapeutic vaccines could be one. There could be generation of an effective immune response. Even we have seen a few days back, antibodies, they also work very well, whether in a passive or an active therapeutic mode. Then even cytokines, IL-2 have been found useful in certain diseases. And then other approaches of maybe phage lysis, bacteriophage lysis, have emerged. And even there is a scope where we can think of generating some very induced kind of immune response. I do not know whether it's workable or not, but experts will tell us. The way we are treating cancer now with a CAR TCL therapy, primary antigen receptor, though it's a very costly one, but still, is it possible when we are getting such cases of AMR where there is no other scope left with us, can we attempt those alternative approaches? And then we firmly believe, at least personally, there is a scope where we can make use of some plant-based products, because we have seen results on coccidiosis, which is a parasitic and much more troublesome in treatment, where plant source compounds are giving real good benefits in terms of treatment. So chances of getting some resistance over there is relatively less compared to, and maybe we can approach other scientific means where Ayurveda had been giving some principles of treatment. So these alternative ways we have to explore, because we are left with no other options. On one side, naturally problems are happening due to antimicrobial resistance, and on the other side, yesterday when it was presented, some deliberate attempts are also being made where they are creating some deletion or mutations, wherein deliberately they are trying to make some of those most dangerous organisms antibiotic resistance. And we do not know in reality, but at least some information is there. It's not only for brucellosis, even for anthrax, multi-drug resistant deliberate organisms are being developed. So in order to really take care of all this, our experts, team of experts, panelists, will give us some good suggestions, and then at the end we'll also see very good suggestions and comments from the audience. With that, may I request Dr. Hegde to start the proceeding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Batra, for that introduction, crisp introduction. So I think in the interest of time, I'll directly go to the presentation. So we have a list of panelists that will be discussing the AMR. We all realize this is an elephant in the room, and we go by the old joke, how do you put the elephant in the fridge? Obviously, you we can get the beast out, and then we'll try to contain the elephant and put it in the fridge. We have panelists who will be speaking about various aspects, including economical aspects of AMR. And our keynote address is going to be delivered by Professor Ramanan Lakshminarayanan, who is the Director and Senior Fellow of CDEP and is associated with Princeton University. Ramanan, please.
Good morning to all of you, and thanks to the organizer for putting together this excellent meeting. I didn't realize there's so many people interested in One Health. Antimicrobial resistance, we've had it for a very long time. In fact, it's truly a One Health problem, and in fact, this is emerging as sort of, people are understanding One Health in many ways at the global level through the lens of antimicrobial resistance, and I'll try to explain why. Of course, resistance has always been around. In fact, resistance to the first antibiotics were detected even before a single patient was treated with the antibiotic, to penicillin in 1940. And that's because the knowledge of how to be resistant exists amongst bacteria, because they have been using this against fungal organisms and other organisms for a very long time. So in fact, anytime you see a paper which says, yes, resistance was there, in the woolly mammoth it was there, in dinosaurs, that's no surprise, because the bacteria have been on the planet for almost 3 billion years, and ever since the first oxygenation event, which they actually made possible. So if we're all breathing oxygen today and we're alive today, it is thanks to bacteria, which actually produce half the oxygen that we breathe, and forests produce the other half. So bacteria are absolutely essential to our existence. But yet, there is a very, very small proportion of them that cause disease, and when they become resistant, there's obviously hundreds of papers on describing resistance around the world. I'll just show you a few. These happen to be from a hospital in Malawi, which is is very similar to trends that you would see in India as well. You see resistance going up to E. coli from close to zero prior to the year 2000 and hitting almost 30%. If you look at Klebsiella, and that goes up from close to zero to over 60%, similarly for other Enterobacteriaceae. And these are the trends that worry people, because resistance, which was always predicted prior to the year 2000, has become a reality post-year 2000 and is approaching serious levels where previously it didn't impact the clinical care of patients. It didn't really mean that someone would die of a resistant pathogen. But today, that is increasingly a common occurrence, including in this very city. So when you hear of patients dying of multi-organ failure after going into a hospital, frequently a bug is involved. If you look at Staph aureus, which is common around the world, and again, these are the places from which we have reliable data. Some places like Russia or parts of Latin America, over 80% resistance. But even in India, we have over 50% resistance, in fact. If you look at ESBL producing E. coli, which is a good indicator organism for resistance in gram-negatives, and you see that an epicenter is beginning to emerge in South and Southeast Asia, and that's happening because of rising incomes, which means a lot more antibiotics are being consumed in India, China, the rest of Southeast Asia. But there's also a high background of infection because our public health facilities are not yet at a place where we are preventing infections through better water, sanitation, and vaccination. We are still relying on antibiotics really as our primary means of controlling infection, which is not a sustainable plan at all. And again, you look at carbapenem resistance, which is what most people are worried about throughout the world. And again, in Klebsiella, you see that resistance in India is above 50%, similar to what's happening in Iran, Vietnam, and also in some Mediterranean countries where resistance is growing to be quite high. These are data from a global database of resistance that CDEP runs called Resistance Map. It's a simple resistancemap.org. It's one word website. And these, you can come up with these comparative charts. I just happen to generate these. And you can compare resistance for any organism against a set of antibiotics that you choose. And it enables comparison, which shows that, you know, in India we're not in very good shape with respect to the effectiveness of our antibiotics. Similarly, for Pseudomonas aeruginosa, India leads. You know, Vietnam is also not far behind, and then China is close behind there, and South Africa as well. Acinetobacter baumannii resistance to carbapenems. Again, India, China, in this case Argentina as well, and Mexico have high levels of resistance. Now, this shows carriage of ESBL. So it's basically ESBL carriage rates, which is a much better indicator of resistance because it's not just infections. And this is an ecological sort of a graph because every dot represents a different study, and the size of that dot represents the size of the study. And these are laid from 2001 up to 2011. And you can see that the line is steepest in some sense for Southeast Asia region. You know, this is the Sierra region where Delhi is actually the headquarters, and then going east. Resistance is rising in every single region, but nowhere more so than in the one that we live in. Now, resistance is not increasing to everything. In many instances, the antibiotics still work. One of the big challenges we have in India is that penicillin is not available. Penicillin is not available because pharmacies don't make much money on penicillin, but penicillin works for a lot of things. So pneumococcal pneumonia actually is still highly susceptible to penicillin, but I would challenge you to go out to the nearest pharmacy and get penicillin. You would find it hard to get it. You can get carbapenems quite easily, which you should not be getting at a pharmacy without a prescription, but you'll find it hard to get a penicillin, which, you know, by rights you should be able to find it easy to get. And this is a problem. Now, resistance emerges anywhere and spreads everywhere, and this is just the case of NDM1 because, you know, we know this example really well. But this is not just NDM. This is USA 300, emerged in the US and spread around the world. Streptococcus pneumoniae 23F, emerged in Spain and then is around the world, including in India. So all countries have contributed, you know, some level of a new resistant strain, and of course these are identified based on the city where they believe to have emerged. But these are constantly emerging from all parts of the world and spreading everywhere because of the frequency of travel. You know, today, I'm sure some of the participants here have flown in from around the world, and they will probably come in with some resistant bugs, and they're probably going to leave with some resistant bugs, and that's just the nature of things. And because of the speed at which people move around, this is going to be an increasing problem. Some of you may have heard about NDM being in Svalbard in Norway, in the Arctic, just a couple of weeks ago, David Graham's paper. You know, that was not surprising at all. In fact, he himself was not very surprised by it because obviously we know that the Earth's microbiome is highly connected. That what happens here today is not disconnected with what happens in Alaska or in Siberia or anywhere else. And the fact that we find these resistance genes, in the Arctic, or the same resistance genes perhaps on the International Space Station, which has also been found, it should not surprise anyone. In fact, we should take it for granted that once resistance is generated, it will spread everywhere very quickly because that is just the nature of things, and that brings us really to the whole idea of One Health. Now, last couple of points on why this is important. A very large study was done in Delhi called the Dennis study in 3 of the big public hospitals, showing high rates of resistance and mortality in newborns who have resistant bugs. And if you see in this graph, the number 1, so that's the Dennis collaboration everywhere where it's not colored. And in this commentary, we compared it against the case fatality rates for other studies of a similar kind. And this came out along with that paper. You see extremely high case fatality rates, 50%, some cases, 60, 70% as well for resistance. I mean, culture positive sepsis is itself, pretty dangerous. And then once it becomes resistant, like you take carbapenems resistant, you have, 60% resistance. Now, you can see that even carbapenem sensitive is also a high case fatality rate, but there's no need to disadvantage a child by, giving them an extra 10% case fatality rates, which is what is happening when we have resistant organisms. And the consequence of this is that the rates of newborns dying of neonatal sepsis, which are caused by organisms resistant to first-line antibiotics, is certainly going up. And it's going in the opposite direction of the overall direction of travel of under 5 mortality, which is going down. And India has a combination of high numbers of newborns with sepsis, we have high levels of resistance, and therefore we also have high numbers of children dying of resistant sepsis. And the top 5 countries together account for about 215,000 deaths every year, and this has been covered widely. This was published in a series that we published in The Lancet a couple of years ago. And this is right. We pay a lot of attention to the travel of superbugs to the Arctic, but we don't pay much attention to the fact that these are actually killing newborns here today. And that is really the far greater emergency than whether you can find a resistant strain in some remote place. UTIs are a problem. We never used to think of UTIs as being deadly, but complicated UTIs are increasingly becoming highly resistant and not treatable. And we know in general that use and resistance tend to be correlated with each other, but most of these data happen to come from developed countries. But once you throw in this particular mix, which is that there's humans, there's sewage, there's industrial pollution, there's animal agriculture, there's aquaculture, and resistant genes are moving all around the place, and antibiotics are also moving all around the place, you have a completely different picture. So we did this analysis that was published a few months ago in Lancet Planetary Health, where we looked at resistance across the world, and we also looked at causal factors around the world. And what we found was, interestingly, that consumption was not a significant predictor of resistance. It's not to say that consumption is not important. It just means that there are many other things that are important. Governance is important, health expenditure is important, infrastructure is important, and all of these. The negative signs means that the higher the level you have of it, the lower the level of resistance you have. And which goes to say that resistance is a classic One Health multifactorial problem that makes it interesting, but also highly difficult to really characterize and say, where condoms stop HIV. That's not the way it's going to happen for AMR. It's going to be many things. It's going to be changing how we use antibiotics in agriculture, in the environment, in humans. It's going to involve infection control. It's going to involve public health. It's going to involve civil society, government, professional organizations, all working closely with each other, because the combination of what's going on here is what creates resistance. And resistance, I should add, is not just a problem just for humans, but it's also a problem for animals as well. You see high levels of resistance in animals as well. I don't have a slide on it today, but we have another paper that's coming out on this. Now, 2/3 of the tonnage of antibiotics sold worldwide are used in agriculture. And it's not really clear whether this is adding as much benefit as it used to. The standard argument also used to be that if you use antibiotics in agriculture, it results in increased average daily growth. Now, if you look at studies that were done in the 1950s, that was true. You got about 10–12% of average daily growth of pigs fed antibiotics over time. But you see over time that advantage has gone down significantly. So today, in a farm that is modern, that has good biosafety, biosecurity, where the animals are vaccinated, the value of antibiotics truly is questionable. And oddly enough, in India, we have those kinds of factory farms that are able to not use antibiotics. So it's not like all of the developing world is filled with backyard farm animals. There are farmers that are interested in going this route, and there are farms that are capable of going this route. What they're missing is really a nudge from the overall scientific community, which says, look, continuing to use antibiotics in animal agriculture, unless it's for treating sick animals, is really a problem. Using it for subtherapeutic growth promotion is not something we can sustain in the long term, either for humans or for animals, and certainly not for the environment either. Now, we also have, along with this, a huge increase in the demand for meat. So poultry consumption in India between 2000 and 2030 is set to increase 6–7-fold. China is set to only double, but the Chinese are already consuming a lot of poultry. So that still accounts for a much larger amount of increased numbers of chicken. And this is just what the population trends are. These are the dietary trends, that people are consuming a lot more meat. And if that meat is going to be raised with the help of antibiotics, then we need some other intervention to help us, because this is not going to work this way. If you look at pigs, China today consumes 6 times the number of pigs as they did in 1975. 6 times the number. In fact, there are 6 times the number of pigs in China as there are in the United States. And the largest US producer of hogs is actually owned by a Chinese company. Now, all of these pigs are raised on antibiotics, and consequently, China consumes half the world's antibiotics, with the majority administered to animals. Now, while I say this, we should also recognize that India is the largest consumer of antibiotics in humans, even though our population is smaller than that of China's. So the Chinese consume a lot of antibiotics in animals, we consume a lot in humans, and put together in the neighborhood, it's not good for drug resistance. In fact, when we published a study 2 years ago, this picture was just overwhelming because it just shows how much of the world's antibiotics are just consumed in one country, and this is India in comparison. This is the overall amount in animals. And of course, all the other countries put together, you can take the next 20 countries put together, and they still consume less antibiotics in animals than China does. So global consumption of all antimicrobials is about 131,000 tons, and projected to go to 200,000 tons by 2030. Now, where do all these antibiotics go? They go into the environment because we excrete them, and the animals excrete them, and they go back into the environment, and all of this goes into the wastewater treatments into 58 river basins of China. And you all know that there is no sewage treatment plant in India that's capable of actually dealing with resistance genes, and not true across most of China as well. And consequently, you have diverse and abundant resistance genes on Chinese swine farms. You see that, compared to the antibiotic-free manure or soil controls, you have a high level of expression of antibiotic-resistant genes, and they cover pretty much every kind of resistance that you can imagine across every kind of antibiotic that you can think of. Now, we're not far behind. We did this study a few years ago, this showed ESBL producing multi-drug resistant E. coli in poultry chickens in Punjab, and we have high levels of ESBL resistance here as well. Again, because we are seeing a lot of antibiotic consumption. And there are reasons for this because there are chickens which don't have a lot of good water, they are grown in extreme temperatures, and consequently the antibiotics are really what is keeping them alive. It is an economic choice. But we have to change that economic choice if we want to make antibiotics available to humans. Now, Joachim Larsen and colleagues have done a lot of work in Patancheru and places near Hyderabad looking at concentrations of antibiotics outside pharmaceutical plants in South India, and they find that in fact the levels of ciprofloxacin that you would find in the lakes outside these pharmaceutical plants have higher concentrations of antibiotics than most physicians would like to see in their patients that are being treated with antibiotics. Now, this is what those farms, those lakes really look like. Now, we don't know how much this contributes to the overall resistance problem, but surely this is something that we can try to change the practice of. Now, last but not least, there are other things that we pay attention to, like right now the Kumbh Mela is going on, and for full disclosure, I'm going there tomorrow, and I will be bathing, and but I also happen to know that the scientific literature says, look, NDM1 is found to be 20 times greater in the Ganga during the pilgrimage season than at other times of the year. Now, what that just means is that we have to pay attention to modes of transmission, and we also have to recognize that once resistant genes are created, it's very hard to put that genie back in the bottle. We cannot control resistance once it comes out. So we have to pay a lot of attention to trying to prevent resistance in the first place. Now, this is just the presence of the gene. It doesn't mean that people are infected necessarily, but it just shows that we have a lot to understand about the transmission of resistant bacteria around the world, within countries, within our own environments, our neighborhoods, and most importantly in hospitals, which is where they really do the most damage, because that's where sick patients who get resistant organisms then are at risk. Most of us, if we're colonized with NDM, may never actually face the problem. But if you're going through a transplant or a surgery and you're in a hospital and you're immunocompromised, then it becomes a problem. So we need to have a far more nuanced and sophisticated understanding of resistance, and also because it's a One Health problem. It's all over so I forgot to show you this. The control samples were actually in Delhi. So it shows that there's increase during the bathing season, and in Delhi there's no change because it's already high to begin with and doesn't actually change at all. So if you go to the Yamuna, you can see that. And in Haridwar and Rishikesh, it does go up during that season. So all of which is a way of saying that, look, we have a lot to really figure out here, and there's a lot of science that remains to be done, and this is like climate change. there's a lot of intricate connections, and every country is in this together. It is not that we can solve the problem just in India or just in China or just in Spain or Portugal. It has to be, and I pointed out Spain because Spain is one of the largest per capita consumers of antibiotics in the world, about 3 times that of India. So it has to be this sort of unified approach, which also brings veterinarians and physicians and public health people and of course, common civil society together. This is the reason why drug resistance was a topic at the high-level meeting at the United Nations, when a high-level meeting is when all the heads of state are present in September of every year. Now, our Prime Minister was not there, but most of the other world's leaders were there at that particular September in 2016, and there was a declaration that all countries, including India, adopted, which was to make sure that there would be a One Health approach to solving the problem of AMR, and that was only the 4th time that a health topic had reached that forum. Previous times were for Ebola, non-communicable diseases, and HIV. So AMR has reached that level of importance, but we have a lot to deliver on the ground to make sure that that is then translated into reality. This was the declaration that was adopted by the General Assembly at that particular point in time. And there were lots of articles written about what we need, how we use antimicrobials wisely, and how we can use global targets for this. But a lot of work remains to be done, a lot on the research side. So I'll leave you with those thoughts just to say that all the pictures that I showed you are at resistancemap.org, and the slides eventually will be up at cdef.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lakshmanan. You've really outlined how important AMR is, and the analogy that I was making, that there's already a beast in the refrigerator, and we need to deal with multiple aspects, including environmental aspects, religious practices, maybe even us just walking to the pharmacy and asking for an antibiotic without a prescription. So it's really a complex topic, and hopefully we'll touch on each of these issues when the panelists speak. So I now invite the panelists to provide their opinions. And we'll start with, of course, we have 5 minutes for each of the presentations, and we'll start with Dr. Sandeep Sareen, who's a scientist in the Medical Biotechnology Division of DBT, and he's the head of and focal point of AMR-related activities in the department. Dr. Sareen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give you, within probably 5 minutes, a bird's eye view of DBT's activities in the field of AMR. This is a report which has been prepared by CDEP with support of DBT, which says the secondary sources of infection. Vaccine is a major program which DBT has initiated since last many years. It focuses on research and training. The major initiatives are Report India TB Initiative, Human Immunology Initiative, which is already there, and then we are working on many vaccine candidates, and there is an EU call on influenza vaccine also. There are 2 trials which are going on TB under Indo-US WAP program, which are under phase 1 and phase 2 trials. This is a report initiative in which DBT, ICMR as well as USAID is working on this, and we have a repository of about 140,000 characterized samples. We started a mission program on biopharma mission in which we are working on biosimilar product development, shared facilities for therapeutics, as well as novel cell line development. The infrastructure which will be developed for this one will be used for industry as well as academia, and there are 2 biosimilars which have been recently funded. In 2018 late, we initiated a joint call on influenza vaccine with EU collaboration, and it will be launched probably in this year. On 2nd October 2018, DBT has launched a mission program on AMR. The priority areas were research and innovation for biotherapeutics, then there was a need for biorepository, then we given a mandate to Kalam Institute for developing a report on research and innovation for diagnostics. They have submitted the preliminary report, and probably by the end of March, it will be finally ready. We have given a mandate to WHO India for making a national priority list for AMR specific pathogens, and again, as per my discussions, probably by the end of February it will be ready. This is a call which was given on 2nd October 2018. and it contains new antibiotics as well as therapeutics of antibiotics. We received about 440 proposals under this one, and 78 have been shortlisted, which will be evaluated further, and it covers broad spectrum for new antibiotics, for therapeutics, for fast therapy. This is the major achievement because country was requiring a repository for AMR microbes. So this we set up late last year. This repository was in existence for microbial resources since 2005, but was given a mandate of becoming a national repository for AMR just by issuing a gazette notification, a notification by department. This is already an approved IDA. The repository is already a member of WFCC. It's a designated repository, and now it has been given the additional mandate for AMR. Biorepository for resistant microbes. It will collect, storage, maintenance, preservation, and recreation of microbes, then journal surveillance data, as well as provide adequate resources and suitable specimens for research. This is a major question which has been asked for this repository, that what the depositor will get. So, as per preliminary discussions with the concerned officer, this is not final. We can even further change this one if need is there. The cultures will be preserved for future. Access to all cultures in the repository, whosoever deposited, the culture can, the depositor could have 2 cultures in practice for each culture. All the data generated will be on AMR pattern, and preference for participation of different training programs will be conducted by ICMR. Then under DBT BIRAC, we have DBT BIRAC Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation partnership, which is working on surveillance, infection prevention and control, and R&D measures. About 10 projects are going on under DBT. Nesta UK, we have a longitude prize about $10 million. Again, about 10 have been funded in last 2 years, and DBT welcomed us. They are working on diagnostics. Under RC UK, we have given these 4 projects on different aspects of AMR, considering the One Health approach, which are undergoing at 4 different universities and institutes in collaboration with UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sareen, for sticking to the time and outlining the various things that DBT is doing on its own and in association with the other organizations. Now we come to Dr. Kamini Walia, who is a senior scientist at the Division of Epidemiology and Communicable Diseases Division of ICMR. Dr. Walia, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. We heard from Ramanan about the state of antibiotic resistance, not only in India but in the global scenario also. And then we heard from Dr. Sandeep Sareen the efforts that DBT is doing in India to address the challenge of AMR. In spite of the efforts which have been generated in the last few years, the national response to antimicrobial resistance that we have launched as a country still remains far from satisfactory. And for that, one of the key reasons has been the lack of evidence. As Ramanan himself pointed out in his presentation, that we know that there is a lot of NDM in Ganges, but then what is the public health significance of having those genes in those in Ganges or in Yamuna? Those linkages we have not been able to establish in spite of putting in a lot of effort and resources in this direction. The reason for that has been that most of the data that was coming initially was from the small labs or medical institutes and lacked methodology in terms of interpretation and in terms of collection of data, and we were not able to get nationally representative trends and patterns of drug resistance. Besides, in spite of having an H1 schedule, we continue to have weak regulations around the antibiotic sales and absence of the comprehensive patient safety program and complete absence of the One Health approach, which definitely has been taken care of by few initiatives which have been started by ICMR and ICR lately. Now the ICMR initiative on antimicrobial resistance basically addresses generating reliable evidence, improving the diagnostic stewardship, improving the antibiotic stewardship, improving the infection prevention stewardship, which is like addressing the huge burden of hospital-acquired infections which we see in our hospitals, whether it is because of the E. coli, Klebsiellas or Acinetobacters. Understanding the mechanisms of resistance, transmission dynamics, clonality, and make some beginning towards creating integrated platforms for One Health, and of course continue to support the basic and the clinical research. Many of you would have previously seen this ICMR network of surveillance which we have created in 20 hospitals across the country, and we are addressing almost 80% to 90% of the WHO priority pathogens, which includes the Enterobacteriaceae, gram-negative non-fermenters, anti-fever organisms, diarrhegenic organisms, gram-positives including MRSA and Enterococcus, fungal pathogens. Now the standardization and harmonization are the imperatives for this network, and we have brought in through creating a standardized operating procedures which use the CLSI guidelines. We have especially invested in creating a EQUAS for the AMR program, because what we thought was the EQUAS which was available to the microbiology lab was not sufficient for the AMR data. Now, what we see from our data that has become available in last 5 years, we see that there is decreasing susceptibility to carbapenems every few years, every year by 5 to 10%, and this can be correlated very well with the introduction of oral carbapenems, which started few years back. Then we are also seeing increasing resistance to colistin. As you can see in the graph on the lower. The graph on the left side, that 37% of the carbapenem resistant Klebsiella pneumoniae is also resistant to colistin, which is a very scary scenario, because in that case, what do you give to the patient? On the right side is the graph which shows the increasing MICs to ceftriaxone, which is currently commonly used for the treatment of typhoid cases. But we also have a good news here. We also see increasing susceptibility to drugs like chloramphenicol, cotrimoxazole, and amoxicillin in typhoid through the data that we have collected from all the centers. So we can go back to those drugs for treatment of typhoid and stop or refrain from prescribing ceftriaxone. So this is the importance of generating data and disseminating data in a timely manner. We also see increasing MICs to tigecycline and linezolid because of the increasing use. Now, as I mentioned in my first few comments, that we have not been able to establish the transmission and dynamics and linkages and how genes move across the different realms, whether it is from the animal to the human or to the environment. This requires intersectoral collaborations, and ICMR took a first step by signing an MOU with the Indian Council of Agriculture Research, and we are working very closely with Nivedi. Dr. Shom is on the panel, and he will be talking more about his work in Nivedi. We are working very closely with them to work an integrated platform for human and animal surveillance, for which we have developed an SOP. Because as most of you would know, there is complete divergence in where the data comes from. From the humans, it comes from the sick humans, but in animals, it comes from the healthy animals. So how do you connect those dots? Besides, one point that I would like to make here is including the animal sector and the veterinary sector in the stewardship efforts. While we use ICMR data to create stewardship in the hospitals, one thing which we know is that a lot of colistin misuse happens in the animals as well as in humans. So this is a low-hanging fruit where the scientists and the clinicians from the human and the animal side can work together to create better stewardship for the use of colistin in both the animal and the human sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bavalia, for outlining the work of ICMR and also in the intersectoral collaboration on AMR. Now, if I may invite Dr. Vivekanand Shom, who is a principal scientist at ICR Nivedi. He is a veterinary microbiologist and epidemiologist, and has been working on AMR for the last several years.
Good afternoon to you all. Thank you very much to the organizing committee for giving us the opportunity to be here with all of you. I would specifically thank Professor Lakshminarayan for setting these things and giving an overview so beautifully. And you are also, that this is it's in my heart, that AMR, the way problem, maybe dimension of problem we underestimate at times. So very rightly Professor Lakshminarayan has mentioned that this is comparable to climate change. Now climate change stakeholders, A to Z are all stakeholders. Similarly, I believe AMR, all are stakeholders. And therefore, the dimensions we need to put our heads together. That's how we are. So thank you very much. We all have been doing a number of work. All of us are very well acquainted with the AMR. And to India with these things, led by ICMR network on surveillance, then the NCDC network, and then one Maharashtra network. Other than these, ICR has initiated INFAR, which is restricted to animal health laboratories, animal science laboratories, and fisheries laboratories. Other than this, the whole surveillance structure is, there is a lot of gaps. That's how it is. Now, since I have been asked to speak few about, needs and opportunities, here I feel this is a step towards beginning. And this platform really is nice. This thing has been restricted to, there are a number of issues that from the starting lecture that you got. But then I believe that focus, this is a really ideally this is a nice beginning. Tackling AMR risk management under One Health is a must for effective mitigation. That means One Health approach, without this, we cannot do much for AMR control. Now, for any management, in fact, the AMR management, that is all about the risk minimization and health value maximization. Now, how do we go the risk minimization? For risk management, scientific risk assessment is very, very important for a better risk management. Now, for scientific risk assessment, that's where the important comes. Adequate AMR and antimicrobial use surveillance system is a must. Now, how it should be? We have in medical, now we have started in animal and aquaculture and so on. There are gaps. That is where that One Health comes into picture. The integrated, and I say this expanding One Health surveillance in human, animal, foods, environment. When I say environment, it includes agriculture, so on, industry, service disposal, and so on. Now, this is where that we need to understand AMR-MU relationship within and across the sector. From studies abroad, we have number of learnings. But what is happening here in this India is vast this thing. For example, settings I'll take again, Professor Lakshminarayan, he said there are a number of factors this thing is evenly distributed, and it's not that only source of antibiotic that is directly related. It's one. Dr. Kamini earlier said primarily they got that the main driver is the antibiotic use. So there is a conflict. That means we are lagging deficient in somewhere in our science. We need to put a lot of effort, and there is a lot to be studied. So then, present surveillance, where do we study? Presently, surveillance in more general sense, isolation of the organism and the phenotypic characterization, either manual or automated. That's how most of us are doing, but it gives limited information that we should be aware of. And lot of inter-laboratory variation. So on mechanism of resistance, we hardly know anything. Presence and spread of AMR gene, its pathway, dynamics, transmission, we hardly know anything. Now this is where there's weaknesses. So for example, antibacterial use in true sense, some predictions are there, but in true sense, what is in animals or in aquaculture or in agriculture or maybe in human, there is a lot of gap information. Drug resistant bacteria in animals, many of us are working, but if I am asked to give an overview of what is this national status, I don't have an answer. Now, antibiotic resistant genes we can transfer between the common cells and the pathogen in the gut or the environment. How it is and what it is, we don't know. We identify a few genes and that is the end of the story. Lack of emergence and transmission data. We have very little understanding of that and the evidence to inform those response relationships. Now this is where I think we need to look at the going beyond from the traditional these things, we need to look at our science also. Now, whole genome sequencing would get a lot of value. But again, it is an isolated organism which is culturally basic. Can we think of metagenomic approach and where it is control independent, maybe in a limited way to start with, research constraint is there. but definitely it's the need of the hour. Without this, the occurrence of AMR gene, mobile genetic element, and then identification of hotspot, dissemination pathway cannot be delineated, and which should add value to the by quantitative risk assessment. And that's how all this government effort, public effort, we must understand the gaps and differences and variations in our traditional surveillance. It is so important, everybody is talking about, we need to improve our quality of science. So this is how, maybe in a limited scale. Then, therefore primarily what is emerged is surveillance with a lot of research and science. It's very, very important. Second important point is, of course,
so can we ask you to wrap up?
Education and awareness, where the general and specific awareness based on evidences. So, and these alone can, I believe, cut down the minutes of AMR by 50%. Bottom line is, we need to be proactive and put our acts together to tackle AMR. Of course, to do that, political commitment, resource mobilization, ensuring stakeholders' involvement, and above all, maybe a strong and dynamic leadership is the need of the hour in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shom, for igniting us on the breadth of AMR, especially coming from the veterinary side. Now, if I may invite Dr. Sunil Gupta, who is the Additional Director and Head of Division of Microbiology at NCDC.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon. Well, I'm representing NCDC, that is National Center for Disease Control under Ministry of Health. And we have been asked in the last few years to coordinate the national effort for AMR containment. And let me tell you, though there are a lot of gaps, as my predecessor described, we have not done enough. A lot of activities have been done in the last few years. We are able to establish some sort of national AMR surveillance system with 40 labs, including the ICMR labs, and the data is now on the international platform. A lot of stewardship activities have been done at the central level. Antibiotic consumption studies have been rolled out across the country. HEI surveillance, healthcare associated infection surveillance program by ICMR jointly with CDC and CDC. There are a lot of IEC activities done to change the mindset of the people, the consumers of antibiotics. But I don't think enough effort has been done. Let me admit, not enough action has been done. Primarily because, health is a state subject. The majority of our population lives in the states of the country. We have 36 states and the union territories. Some of the states are not coming forward to that extent as they should have, except for a couple of states like Kerala has taken a lead, Madhya Pradesh has taken a lead. So that's a challenging task. National Action Plan has been rolled out, the technical plan, and we are finding it very, very challenging to implement or operationalize. And there are a number of reasons, and one of the major reasons is the lack of intersectoral coordination. So with that background, I'll proceed with my presentation as per the template provided to me in the 3 slides. So first is what are the major needs and opportunities for AMR containment. And as has been mentioned earlier, we must have a robust AMR surveillance. At the moment, surveillance has been started with 40 labs. In the veterinary sector, another 20 labs have been rolled out. But then it's just a small piece of information. I mean, considering the large magnitude of the problem and the large size of the country, I don't think that is enough. And we have to go right up to the district level. Most of the data which is being generated is from the tertiary care setting. That's not enough. We have to go right up to the district level, the village level. Unfortunately, we don't have good quality microbiology labs at that level. We are striving through our IDSP program, but so far we have not been successful. And then we have to take it to the animal sector. FSSAI, Food Safety Standards Authority of India, recently has taken a lot of initiative for AMR containment under Ministry of Health. They have established about a 100 lab network. They are all accredited lab by NABL for generating data on AMR pathogens as well as antibiotic residues in the food sector. Then Environment Ministry has to wake up. In spite of our best effort, we are not getting the inputs from the environment, as Dr. Ramnan mentioned, and our environment, especially the aquatic environment, due to the huge pharma industry making antimicrobials which we have in the country, they are one of the important source of antibiotic exposure to animal population as well as the human population. They are not somehow coming forward. Then strengthen regulations. As Kamini mentioned, we have Schedule H1 as well as Schedule X in place for quite some time. But when it comes to implementation, very hardly any implementation. And there are a number of reasons. Unfortunately, we don't have the CDSO in charge, Dr. Ishwara Reddy. He could have better answered this question. What is being done? I have been told nearly 500 drug inspectors have been now hired. They have been trained to enforce the implementation. But again, it's more of a state subject. Unless state takes the lead and the state drug inspectors start enforcing, nothing is going to happen. So that's another area. Then strengthen IEC. A lot of IEC activities are done by ICMR also, NCDC also, including media campaigns, interaction with the print media, the electronic media, organizing public lectures at various forums. But I don't think that is a small drop in the ocean. Unless the states take the ownership, nothing is going to happen. And we have to change the mindset of our clinicians. They are using antibiotics left and right as they please because of various reasons again. So their mindset needs to be changed. Then another area of concern is rampant use of antibiotics, especially cholesterol, as animal growth promoters in poultry in our country. There is enough evidence to show that. You can go to any pesticide shop and get any of those human antibiotics in sacks. That's area of concern. We have to take some action to ban use of animal growth promoters, and then strengthen research, which is the foray of ICMR, DBT and other organizations. There's a need to develop rapid, affordable point of care diagnostic, because one of the main reasons of irrational antibiotic use in our country is the clinicians or even the patients don't have access to affordable diagnostic. And many times they think that the cost of one course of antibiotics is 1/10 the cost of a good diagnostic. So in the absence of that, they go for the former option. And finally, it leads to overuse of antibiotics. So that's another area. Now, what are the lessons learned so far in the last 3-4 years in the intervention? First of all, there is lack of knowledge of AMR in the community. As such, the clinicians themselves, the pharmacists, policymakers, health administrators, they don't still perceive AMR as a disease entity, like tuberculosis or H1N1 influenza, swine, whatever. So it is still being considered as a vague issue, which is due to many unrecognized factors. So they have
can we ask you to please summarize?
And so these are the other challenges to change the mindset of general public, the clinicians, and the states are not coming forward, as I mentioned. The unique aspect of this problem is it is not being recognized as a specific disease entity. It needs a multi-sector involvement. In our National Action Plan, if you see, there are involvement of 11 other ministries besides the Human Health Ministry. Then what can we learn? Of course, there is a need of strong intersectoral coordination, both within the human health and outside human health, strong central-state collaboration, strong advocacy for policymakers, and educate children about AMR at a very tender age, right from the school level. And these are the how we are going to address, develop a robust AMR containment program with strong political and bureaucratic will, otherwise nothing is going to happen. Have a strong AMR surveillance in all the sectors, educate people at a very early age, and the bottom line, one thing which I want to say, strong IEC to change the mindset of all the stakeholders, the community, the agriculturists, practitioners of medicine, backed by a strong regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for laying out really the intricacies of implementation of control of AMR. Now I invite upon Dr. Rosanna Asma. She's coming to us from Malaysia, and she's the Deputy Director and Head of Zoonosis and Veterinary Public Health Section in Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, since the time is so limited, I'll straight go to the topic, that is issues and challenges. Actually, the AMR in Malaysia. Okay, the issues and challenges of AMR control in Malaysia actually is the dilemma between the food safety, food security, and human health. So the farmers tend to jeopardize the human health because of for the food safety and food security. Farmers understand that for the food safety is more due to the infectious diseases. So in order to counter this infectious disease, the farmers start to give antibiotic or antimicrobial as a preventive measures. And as for the food security, in order to maximize the food production, the farmer will use antimicrobial as the growth promoter in order to compete with the normal microflora to increase the feed intake. And also there's a correlation between the MRL. The farmers or the livestock industry, there's certain antibiotic given this maximum residual limit. So they will use the antibiotic at certain limit as a growth promoter or as a prevention, and also the AMU. Bear in mind that in the livestock industry, the usage of antimicrobial is for three purposes. That is for treatment, prevention, and also as the growth promoter. And all these things actually already a study shown that in the end will lead to AMR. And another issues are the limited availability of the veterinary's antibiotic will force the vet to use whatever antibiotics available in the market, especially the antimicrobial for human use, to be used in animal. And also, we have to inculcate this responsible and prudent use of veterinary product by farmers and also veterinarians, because farmers always think the economic interest for their livelihood. And this diagram actually is to summarize what I already explained just now. In the end, all these things got correlation to cause the AMR. And how veterinary services in Malaysia try to mitigate all these problems or to minimize all these issues, we are introducing the farmer's declaration form, meaning that before the animal can be marketed for slaughter, the farmer has to declare that they are not using any antimicrobial within the withdrawal period. And also, if we found, the authority found that the farmer didn't abide to what they claim, we will suspend their operation license for the farm. And then also we will introduce this the veterinary drugs prescription, especially for the livestock. In Malaysia, we are so lacking in prescribing vet product to the ruminant especially, and also for the swine industry. And we will enhance awareness program among the stakeholders and also the farmers. And at this juncture, Malaysia already stopped using, put a ban on the usage of colistin as a growth promoter effective 1st January in 2019. And also there will be a phasing out of antimicrobial that is critically important in human as the growth promoter. And last but not least, we already have this so-called One Health National Action Plan for AMR, which is already being launched by two ministers, that is the Minister of Agriculture and also the Minister of Health in Malaysia. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Asma, for bringing us perspectives from Malaysia. Moving on, now I invite Dr. Dan Vanderende from the US CDC. He's the Medical Officer in International Infection Control Program in the Division of Healthcare Quality Promotion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our team works primarily on the human side across the world to decrease antimicrobial resistance, and has various ways of doing it. What I'm presenting is a logic model based on our experience to control AMR. In that logic model, detection of AMR is a key piece, a surveillance piece, without which we are unable to do targeted infection prevention control and stewardship work, which are underpinnings for controlling AMR. And also, one of the key things we want to do is to improve the use of existing resources. To do all this, there are some basic elements which we need to have particular challenges and opportunities. Supplies operationalizing control of AMR for a laboratory to do surveillance, getting them the appropriate supplies. The quality of those supplies is a big issue in many countries and often has many challenges associated with that. Equipment, the cost of equipment, making equipment, staffing and training. So some of these elements are very basic. In many hospitals that we go to, some of the most fundamental aspects to control AMR, running water to wash hands, is not available. And so you can see the sink, which is now being used as a place to put a purse. If this was an uncommon situation, that would not be a problem. But unfortunately, we see this a lot. Staff and training. One of the issues we see is that many countries are wanting to do good infection prevention control or to do surveillance, but they lack the staff to actually perform these. There's a huge need for both postgraduate and undergraduate training. All of these resources require some fundamental interventions. A mandate and authority. Many countries have signed on to declarations. They have said we want to prioritize, but fewer have actually given that authority to individuals and leaders. And often what we see is that individuals are appointed on already full plates within a ministry, or within a state, or within a facility to do this. And the most success that we found is in countries that appoint a single individual or a group of individuals whose sole responsibility is to do surveillance, infection prevention control, or stewardship. And this is needed both at the country level, at the state level, and the facility level. And a simple example would be infection prevention control nurses who are full-time, who there's evidence to say that this is what's needed at a facility level, and yet there are very few places where it is a mandate, where countries are saying this is an absolute must. Funding. Funding is necessary. We need funding from single sources to do bigger things like set up reference laboratories. We also need funding from a sustainable source for both personnel and coming from a government, a state, or a facility. We also have to look at alternative funding which is incentivizing performance, incentivizing a facility to spend their own money, such as in the form of regulations or policies that promote a facility to have full-time staff or get supplies for infection prevention control. So all these things are a very simple logic model, but incredibly complex. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weinberger, for bringing out the importance of going from paperwork to implementation. We have one more person on the panel, Dr. Chaitanya Kumar Skoduri, who comes from, he's the Associate Director of International Public Policy at the US Pharmacopoeia, and he's from Hyderabad, and he deals with, his specialty is patient safety and public policy.
Thank you for the introduction, sir. I want to start by thanking the organizers, especially Dr. Rao, for giving us this important opportunity even in the last moment. So I'm the Associate Director for US Pharmacopoeia, the Pharmacopoeia of the US, but it's also considered in many other countries. I want to talk about that aspect of antimicrobial resistance, which is usually not talked about. That is, how does medicine quality affect, or what's the action on antimicrobial resistance going on? So the World Health Organization and member countries across the world tries to have access to medicines, but from a patient safety point of view, the quality of that medicines is quite important to reduce infections as well as increase the treatment outcomes. But if you truly talk about stewardship, stewardship is about right medicine, right patient, and right time. And right medicine essentially is the identity and purity, which is quality of antimicrobial that is being used. Imagine you're a clinician who is treating a patient, and the patient comes back to you with the infection still active. And at that point, you would want to know, is it that the antibiotic didn't work because of lack of efficacy, or is it because the infection is resistant? So that's the question you're faced every day. And if you look at the World Health Organization data, again, 1 in 10 medicines globally, not just the low and middle income countries, but globally is substandard or falsified. And also if you look at medicine quality, it's not just manufacturing is the only place that it gets affected. Anywhere from the supply chain, including the storage, the transport, degradation because of heat, humidity, so all those factors contribute to it. And even in pharmacovigilance, if you see, it's not just adverse reactions, but lack of efficacy that will be considered for treatment. And quality is definitely an essential aspect if you're coming up with a new antimicrobial. So, why is it important to look at medicine quality? When the quality is compromised for various reasons, it activates a mutant selection window. That is, a medicine which does not have 100% active pharmaceutical ingredient is similar to having a subtherapeutic treatment. Even if you buy antimicrobials with prescription, even if the patient follows the strict treatment protocol, the subtherapeutic treatment promotes the growth of resistant infection, just like not having stewardship in general. Also, for the governments to invest, it's really important to understand the economic effect of poor quality medicines. And if you look at the medicines, not just in humans, even in veterinary, the current evidence says that the volume of medicines that are registered is equal to the volume of medicines that are unregistered and not quality assured. So one of the things we try to do is start this quality institute, where we are trying to fund researchers across the globe in academic institutions. Dr. Ramanan sitting here is fortunately one of our advisors. So what we are trying to do is to really look at microbiological aspect or molecular aspects of development of resistance. Is it the excipient quality? Is it the degradation product quality? That is like various parameters that of medicine quality that affects the development of resistance. And we try to generate evidence so that policy decisions can be taken based on that evidence. And we try to use this knowledge in building a more public health outcomes which are not because of poor quality medicines, but a better quality antimicrobials that are being used. But if you also think globally, medicine quality is not just important for antimicrobials, but any kind of treatment failure that comes because of poor quality medicines has a huge economic burden, which otherwise can be spent back into the public health. So we generally work on quality of medicines as well, but thank you again for the opportunity. There are two things I would want you to go back and remember. One, there is no enough evidence of how medicine quality is currently affecting on the AMR burden, because there is no data on how much of the medicines is actually substandard quality. And the second, when you have a poor treatment outcome or the infection not being treated, apart from suspecting resistance, there can also be a suspecting of antimicrobial quality that's being used. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Koduri, for bringing the rarely touched upon subject of medicine quality. With this, we come to the end of panel presentations, and we can hopefully take some questions before we go for the summary.
Thanks for the great panel. It's a very, very interesting discussion. I have a question specifically in the animal health segment. I think there are two elements that clearly draw attention here from the intersectoral perspective. One is the element of MRL. We've been talking about use of antibiotics as growth promoters or for other applications in animal health. The Indian FSSAI has actually notified in August the MRL levels for all antibiotics, and it's effective January 2019. The level of awareness is extremely low, and having these notifications is not going to serve the purpose unless we have an extremely strong enforcement framework with a multi-sectoral approach. Because we have to bring together a very, very fragmented farming community, certain segments that are consolidated, the industry as well as all the public stakeholders to enforce this. So one wanted to also elicit a discussion on the intersectoral approach required for implementation of MRLs now finally notified and applicable from January 2019. And two, from the market mechanisms perspective too, I think there's a lot required in terms of thinking through and conceptualizing. A very, very poignant example in the aquaculture sector. In shrimp, which is where we export more than $4 billion of shrimp, there is literally no use of antibiotics because exports get rejected at the port. But in the case of domestically consumed fish, there is rampant use of antibiotics getting thrown into the pond. Right? So if there is a market mechanism where there is a price realization and a reward for better farming habits and better farm management, we'll be able to drive a change in domestically consumed meat, whether it's fish or poultry or any other form of meat for that matter. So even in terms of market mechanisms,
Could
how do
you
we drive...
please be brief?
Yeah, I'm concluding the question. So even in terms of market mechanisms, how do we drive an intersectoral approach to change farming practices which have big influence on AMR?
Anyone care to respond?
Dr. Ganguly?
So I think that's a really valid point. You can either do it through regulation, which then separates the price of antibiotics, free meat, or with reduced antibiotics. But in many countries, this has happened because of consumer preferences. If people are not willing to pay more for meat that was raised without antibiotics, then we have a problem, because then they don't actually value that as an actual commodity. You can slap a label which says antibiotic free and put it on just some packets of meat versus on other packets of meat. But if the average consumer says, oh, that is 10 rupees cheaper, so that's what I'll buy, regardless of whether it was raised with antibiotics. So what you're suggesting is a good mechanism, but it's incomplete without consumer information. And that's where we need to do a lot more work. We have to demystify this whole, what antibiotics actually mean. I don't think most people understand that these are powerful drugs with huge side effects. People are scared of vaccines. They should be scared of antibiotics, if reasonably so. So we've done an incomplete job in that sense. But once we do that, you'll see examples like in the US, for instance, much of the drive to reduce antibiotics in agriculture has not come from regulation, it has come from consumer preferences.
What I saw today was, it kept me thinking when I got the CDC presentation of the 3 points. What I find is that antimicrobial resistance scenario is a very messy scenario. Too many players, and we do not know who coordinates all the activities. So I have a suggestion that we should have a mission under Prime Minister, that there is a nutrition mission, there has been one in the HIV/AIDS and others, and that will answer CDC's other thing in the leadership. So then we will have one leadership, and with every stakeholder having a defined role into that. And the second point was funds. We should not actually scatter funds. We should pool an entire fund, and according to the action points, we distribute those funds. So this will be perhaps one of the, and the third part which came into that, it was a beautiful slide, actually it told everything what we need to do. The third point which came into that is that how do we come as a whole into action point, tackling serving the community, which is the actual consumer of all of this. So we need to come, but I will suggest that after this particular symposium, somebody actually sees that how we can tackle it together rather than in silos.
Any response? Dr. Ganguly rightly said, it's not only true for AMR, I think for most of our R&D initiatives or activities across have the similar kind of problems that we are facing. We are doing in a different pockets or sometimes overlapping. Coordination still needs to be improved. The mechanism still needs to be built where we pool our resources and make them for very effective use rather than spreading our resources and not getting the real output out of it. I think the points are valid. Any other thing that you would like to mention?
My question is quite brief question, please. My question is to Professor Lakshmi Narayan. Suppose a bacteria is susceptible, how many duration it takes to become again, say, if it is resistant, then how duration it takes to become again cell-safe? Is there any such type of the study is there?
So there are examples where a drug has been withdrawn from use and sensitivity does come back. But remember that you're starting with a frequency of maybe 1 in 100 million bacteria being resistant, and we recognize resistance only when it comes to 1 in 100. You can take away selection pressure, and because of fitness cost of resistance, the susceptibles will gain an advantage. But very rarely, well, I would say, it has never been seen that resistance then goes back to that 1 in 100 million. You may see resistance going back to 1 in 100, which means that the minute you apply selection pressure, resistance will rise again quite rapidly. So, and we have experience from malaria for this, for instance, with withdrawal of sulfadoxypyrimethamine from Malawi. And then when 10 years later you try to use the drug again, it was sensitive, the parasites were sensitive, but resistance went up very fast. So it's not a reliable way of recovering effectiveness. But there are other mechanisms like amoxicillin and amoxicillin clavulanic acid where a second drug can actually make a difference. So you have examples like that which might be a better solution for us.
Sir, antibiotics are the single kind of the drug which are saving maximum number of lives in the world. But if you see in the last 2-3 decades, hardly any new antibiotics are coming up, and the inputs for the R&D have been very less, even through the governments or the private sector. So is there any hope for better funding in the future, and maybe the governments or some big charities fund research in new antibiotics?
I think we'll leave it at that. We are running out of time, so my apologies for stopping these questions. I think the discussions can go on. This is a very broad topic, so please bear with us so we can discuss later, I think. If you have specific questions, you can talk to the particular panelist. Okay, so with that, I'll request Dr. Batra to summarize.
All these presentations and discussions are extremely useful. Most of the points are taken care of. Suggestions are highly relevant that have come out of it. And still being a multi-sectorial and multifactorial, this is how the problem needs addressing at social level, at scientific level, at policy level, at funding level, at this other human resource level. I think suggestions are much more valid that have come up, and in the coming days, the situation will start improving. Few efforts have been made, including in India, and we were happy to learn that FSSAI is now has made certain steps that are, but implementation, of course, it will take some more time. Happy to learn even our neighboring country in Malaysia, they are banning cholesterol from maybe next month onwards for as animal growth promoter. So things will start changing. Let us hope and join hands together to take care of. It's not a disease entity anymore. It's an epidemic at this stage among many specialists. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you for this wonderful session. So, as a token of our respect, we will give some small mementos to the chairman, moderator, and all the panelists. Thank you, one and all. So we'll be back exactly at 2:15 So please see that everyone is here at 2:15. Otherwise, our sessions will get postponed. And
group photograph, all have to come
yeah.
towards stage.
Yeah, before we break for the lunch, we will have the group photo. And here only, to the dais.
All can come towards stage and then it's going to be a group photograph.